Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the founder of the Rise Above Justice Movement and the host of the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. Today, I'll give a viewer discretion as advised due to the nature of the topics that we will be discussing. And I am joined by somebody that I've known about for a very long time, somebody that is an inspiration to me, somebody that has a very impactful story. So without further ado, Terra, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. You're so kind.
Hasn't always been like that. Hasn't always been like that, but thank you. I appreciate that. It is an absolute honor to sit down and talk to you today and talk about, some of your journey, but also really hit on the topic, which the topic of today's discussion is mainly about ethical storytelling and telling survivor stories in an ethical way that does the justice part versus, perpetuate and paint the perpetrator as this hero, right? Because we know that mainstream media does tend to twist survivor stories. They do it in a very negative way. So I'm excited to, sit down and talk with you, but also to hear your perspective on like the ethical storytelling, because you've told your story literally thousands of times, and I know it hasn't always been a positive outcome. It hasn't always been a, negative, it hasn't always been positive. There's always like that mix because that's just how it is. But feel free to introduce yourself and let's go from there.
All right, beautiful. Thank you. Well, I'm Terra Newell. I'm best known for being the survivor of Dirty John Meehan. Dirty John Meehan was a serial predator, a con artist that my mom married, not knowing he was a psychopath. And he preyed upon our family pretty quickly. That relationship was very fast moving. And at the end, he ended up coming after me and attacking me, and I defended myself in self defense. And so that is what I was known for. My case is also pretty clean cut in a sense where I had so many witnesses where there was no trial. And I'm very thankful for that. But I did even question something that you mentioned. If I was in jail, would I be more glorified in my story?
Ooh, ooh. Because it would be like that aha moment, right? And like in every experience, in every story, there's always that aha moment, right? There's like this slow burn, which I've never been like a slow burn, like kind of like person. Like whenever I'm hearing a story or watching a movie, I like action, like jumping right in, getting it done,
Yeah,
just get it over with, right?
just get it done.
But thinking about that, what's been your experience with, social media? You also created, or, you were a big part of, and I believe you created the Dirty John podcast.
So
And
I was a player in that.
yeah, so walk us through your journey with like social media, with talking with the media about your story. What's been your experience with the storytelling aspect?
It has been an interesting journey. I have definitely, at first, I really wanted to tell my story because I thought it would help other women. And that is still a main goal in telling my story when I do tell it, because I think that it's so powerful how I was able to defend myself, and I am here and I'm alive. And that is something that's so rare, especially with so many women. Like most women end up dead in my situation. So I'm very fortunate to be here today. And so I wanted to kind of be like, because also when the podcast happened, I did the podcast and it was so fresh. During that time, I was involved heavily in church. I went to church 3 times a week and I prayed every single day. And I was like, what should I do with my story? And then that's when the LA Times came to me. I'm also different, I'm a bit spiritual now. And because I work in true crime.
I think it does it to you. I think
I think it does.
it kind of it helps you like realize how true crime, religion, like the that generational trauma and overcoming those cycles of abuse and overcoming the cycles of violence, and it continues to perpetuate upon generations, right? And
Yeah.
it continues that cycle. So I think it does do it to you, because I'm also spiritual myself. I've always said, oh, I'm a progressive Christian, or I'm this, or I'm that. But at the same time, it's like, I think working in the advocacy space and working with survivors, and then also going through my own religious trauma, I think it definitely opened my eyes a lot and made me realize that, hey, maybe I'm not as deep into this as I thought I was. And, you know, whenever we think about that, right? So we see the
Yeah.
rise of like Christian nationalism in the country and across the world. We see that, and we continue seeing that. So I think I have to agree. I think it really does change your like the perspective. And hearing other stories, I think it's definitely changed me. And I'll be the first to admit that it's opened my eyes a lot. So thank you for saying that specific part. Now, whenever we think about the ethical storytelling and we think about the aftermath and like thinking about like the healing journey, right? So it's kind of like shift gears a little bit and we'll dive back into like the ethical storytelling here in just a second. But the healing journey, because we know that healing is not linear, it is complex and it looks different for each person. What may have worked for me may not have worked for you. What worked for you may not have worked for me or my mom or whoever, or our mutual friend Celine or whatever. But thinking about that healing journey, that aftermath, which oftentimes, sometimes feels worse than the actual trauma itself, what has been like your healing journey for you? What do you find to be the most healing aspect of your specific journey? And what does healing look like to you? What have you done to get to where you are now? Because you're just a badass human being.
Thank
I'll
you.
be the first to say that you are a badass human being, that you bring this energy that you can just fill up the room with. And it's just this bright, vibrant personality. But there's a lot to that. There's a lot of backstory to that. So I would love to learn about what your journey has been with healing and just kind of walking through that a little bit. And this is the point where I know this is an open ended question because there's a lot that goes into that. This is the point in the podcast where people tend to ramble. That is open to you as well. Feel free to ramble, and I'm here to listen and amplify,
Right.
uplift, support. I'm here.
Okay, well, thank you. I feel like my healing journey was a bit of, I don't know. Can I cuss on here?
Yes, absolutely. I encourage it.
Like a bit of a fuckery. Like I had to
Yeah.
fuck around, find out first. And honestly, I had to go through the journey of going through the church first, being very supported by that. And I don't negate people from going into religion. I just, I question the pastors a bit. I question people who hold God over people's heads because it has been used as such a manipulation tactic, as we mentioned earlier. So that was big in my healing journey. Like I was deeply supported by such a great community of, you know, some churches are very judgmental, but I got a good group during that time. And these people really loved me in a sense. And they wanted to bring me in. So I literally went through therapy. I got set up with a therapist because when my trauma happened, there was a lot of going through it. I was displaced from my apartment because my family didn't want me to be at the Coronados anymore. And I was just in shock. So I was like, okay, I guess I shouldn't go there. And I wasn't really like, at first, I was in such a shock. I wasn't connecting certain dots with everything. And even my mom went and she hid the knives. And I was like trying to make food and I'm like, where's the knives? And she's like, ah. And I had, it wasn't a trigger until like she kind of made it that trigger for me. but it would have been a trigger in the long run. She just brought that awareness, because I was in such a state of shock. And it's not, she was trying to do everything to protect her daughter, especially after the fact that her ex-husband tried to kill me. She's feeling this immense amount of guilt. And so she's trying to do everything to make things right and to help me get better and to think of triggers, which is extremely kind, where, but it still kind of brought that awareness that, oh, should I be triggered to a knife? And then people started to look at me like this pariah in a sense, like guys that I was I was hooking up with like oh my God. I was in my whore phase. I just got out of a relationship and it was like I thought I was gonna marry this guy and I was 25 and I just kind of lived in Newport and I was hooking up with a couple of guys at that time. Oh my gosh. I don't think I've ever told people about that. So I've been hooking up with a couple guys at that time, and then those guys kind of stopped hooking up with me because they saw that I was telling people that I killed someone. And so they looked at me like this pariah and they thought I was crazy. So they stopped hooking up with me during that time. And I just kept going out with friends because I just didn't want to be alone. And I thought if I was alone, that's when everything kind of would creep in, like all these thoughts, everything that would happen. And oh my gosh, you're still laughing about the whore face. I feel like everyone has one, but that was just my moment of time. And it's funny because I got out of a relationship and I did not go into a whore phase at all. I kind of wish I did, but I did not. I was like, I am an adult now. I am going to process things. I'm going to go to workout classes and maybe I'll date someone eventually. But I got my dick in great in my 25 years of life. So back to your face right now. Okay, so pulling myself together right now. So I didn't really want to be left alone. I went out with my friends. I would go out drinking. And when I would go out drinking, I would kind of just like be down for whatever. And then I would also go out with my friends and not drink just because I didn't want to be alone whatsoever. And so I just went into this kind of like turmoil and I just kept getting worse in a sense. And one day I ended up getting in a fight with my sister. The cops were called. And when the cops were called, they kind of told my mom and my family, like, something has to happen. She can't be in this environment because I wasn't healing and things were just getting worse. And so my sister had called from Texas and she told my mom several times, she was just kind of begging my mom, like, let Tara come out here, let Tara come out here. And I was so thankful for that because I ended up packing up my car. I like made 2 days of like saying goodbye to friends and like planning everything. Packed up my car. My mom drove with me out to Austin, and then I stayed with my sister. And then that's when I got set up with a EMDR therapist. I was going to therapy before, but unfortunately, the therapist told me that she didn't think I wanted to get better after I told her that I didn't want to be here anymore and that I had thoughts of suicide and that I just like I didn't know what to do. I just didn't know what to do with my trauma and everything was so heavy. She was also considered one of the main therapists at Kaiser and one of the main trauma therapists. And so she only had openings once a month. And that really made it also hard to heal in my trauma. And then I also went to the Amen clinic for a minute, but unfortunately that was $400 a session. And so I couldn't afford that anymore. And so things got worse, and I went out to Austin. And when I went out to Austin, that's when everything kind of really started to come together in my healing journey, where I thought I was healed. I was going to EMDR therapy twice a week. I got set up with a great therapist. Her husband was also in law enforcement, and he was in martial, I don't know. He was something like major. And so she had dealt with so many different people with different traumas and combative traumas. So I felt comfortable enough and she was also faith-based, and but she didn't throw her faith onto like every session. It was more so just honestly, she was really just loving and accepting of anything I said and just wanted to help me heal. And like when you think of someone that's supposed to be like Christ-like in a sense, they're supposed to not be judgmental. And they're supposed to be loving and, like Jesus loved the whores. So so this woman really presented to be Christ-like and just really a loving person. And this was exactly what I needed. I needed someone to be there to have my trust in and to help guide me through this journey. And at the end of every at the end of every session, I would go to this pet store and I would go hang out with like the birds. There was scarlet macaws, there was a Moluccan cockatoo, there was an umbrella cockatoo, and I would just kind of hang out with birds. I love the birds. And there was an African gray, but me and African grays just don't really vibe. I don't know why. They just never liked me. I think I met one bad one, and and he just affected me, and they could just tell that I met that one bad one time that tried to pluck at me. So, but there's a lot of other beautiful birds in there. And it really was great because I got to connect with animals afterwards. And then I didn't work during that time, so I got to go hiking every day. I was going to a rock climbing gym and I was doing bouldering there. So I would climb up the wall. And you're really not supposed to do this. You're actually supposed to like climb back down the wall, but I would go to the top and I would just like let go, and I would feel that fear, and I would try to make friends with that fear. And because it was that fight or flight in a sense, and that really helped me get one with my nervous system as well and pay attention to my breath. And then because I got in this community with this church, I had so many friends that I could always hang out with, and we would always go and do healthy things like hike. Actually, you know what, it was great, those girls also did party too. I remember literally going out to the domain and we would do a bar crawl. And I thought it was so cool because in so many churches that was frowned upon. And so these girls would go out and they would drink. They wouldn't go and get hammered all the time, but they would go out and like have a few drinks, and it was fun, and it was like it was normal in a sense where you think of people and like you got to find your church and niche. And I'm very spiritual now. I love my yoga, but I still pray to God. But that was something that really did help me because I did have that constant community and someone constantly being there to help heal me and help like support me. But then like you say, healing is not linear. And for me, I met a boy, and it was when one of my girlfriends came into town and then we went out and then we were doing the bar, just like getting wild. We ended up at a strip club one night and I was literally, oh my gosh. Like I said, I was a little bit in my whore face. I was on this guy's lap making out with him at the strip club. And then my friend is talking to this other guy. And then she like calls me over and she's like, Tara, this guy is from California and Vegas, just like you. And I looked over, he was like 6'4". He was just like a beefcake. And I just hopped right off of that guy's lap and I go up to him and I look up because he's so tall and I put out my hand and I'm like, hi, I'm Tara. Nice to meet you. So I heard you're from Vegas in California. And then we started talking and then I started dating him. And then him and I liked to party a little bit too much together. And I was the type of girl that would amp him up and I remember it was so funny. We went on a date and I'm like, I'm looking for a Christian man, someone to go to church with, even though I met you at the strip club. And and he was like, I'm looking for a good Christian woman. And it was, to this day, one of the best dates of my life. Just like, it was such a fun date. And we went to the Alamo. We saw two movies in a row. We had the recliner seats. And then at the end, we went back to, he dropped me off at my place and he didn't kiss me. He was trying to be a good, quote unquote, good Christian man. And then we ended up going on another date like a few days later. And then he's like, I want you to meet some of my friends. And then I noticed him, he just kept going to the bathroom. And then he came, and then I was like, what were you doing in the bathroom so long? And then he came back and he kissed me, and then he tasted like cocaine. So I said, oh, so you're holding out on me. And then I kind of went back into my party girl phase with him. Even though I was like, I want a good Christian man, and he was like, I want a good Christian woman. And then we just partied a lot. I kind of fell back into that cycle. And I it's weird because when I'm with like a guy and they're a big partier, I'm a big partier. And then because I just went through that phase of like getting out of a relationship, I was like kind of in like my single girl party phase. And before that, I was in a 5-year relationship. I didn't really drink that much because drinking made me sick. And so when I got out of it, I just like kind of went into those college years I never had. And so I really had to navigate life. And then on top of this big trauma, I was using all these things to kind of coat that trauma. Even though I went through a place where I thought I was healed with EMDR, I was doing so many healthy things. I was in a healthy community, but I just got thrown back into like kind of that codependency and that bad boy, like, hey, and I understood more where my mom was coming from because even though she didn't go and do drugs and stuff with those guys, like she fell for a bad guy and then she conformed to him and she did whatever for him. And it kind of gave me the understanding of like this generational trauma. And then I end up moving back. I go back to therapy. I kind of get, the Dirty John stuff starts to come out. I start to get in that. And then I get into a lot of like the party world and true crime and meeting up with people in true crime that drink a lot. And then it was weird because at that point I was kind of considered this like shiny little thing. and people would get so excited and be like, "Oh, this is Tara. Oh, this is Tara." And everyone wanted to be my friend and everybody was my friend. And it was really interesting because you are now when your story is hot, you're actually considered a pseudo celebrity. And you're a celebrity for a moment, but it's like a fad. And it's interesting too because you feel so popular and then you feel even supported in your survivor story a bit. And you feel like you've found this new community. And to be honest, up until that point, I really wasn't believed by all my friends or people that I thought were my friends. And so I really got into that hole and that dopamine rush of sharing my story. And I felt like I was getting my control back, even though it wasn't control because I didn't have any control of where the story ended up of because literally an article would do a story of me and then the Daily Mail would do something and take it from that story. So nothing was sacred in a sense. And then I remember Cosmopolitan doing an article on me and saying that I make $3 million. That was a false lie. I wish they could find me that money. And there was just a lot of false information being printed on me. And at one point, you get so over it and you're like, okay, that's false out there. I'm not going to fight with them about that. And because if you try to fight with everything that's false, you're going to be fighting all day. And it's just because the story gets repurposed over and over and over again. And it's like the game of telephone. So many pieces of the holes are missing. And even the documentary, I remember doing the documentary, the original, the Dirty John, the Dirty Truth on Oxygen. And I remember being asked by the producer, being like, okay, tell me what happened here. And I gave my response. And then she said, well, can you say this differently because we need it to align with what your mom's saying. And I literally argued with the producer for a minute and I said, well, that's not true. Like there's certain things because my mom went through this trauma and unfortunately there's so much shame at times because there's victim shaming and that doesn't help the survivors coming forward. There's so much that she didn't want to say because she already was getting ridiculed in the media and people were saying how dare she not see this, how dare she not see that. And we were kind of at the tail end of the or tail be like in the Me Too movement in a sense, but people didn't really know what victim shaming was during that time. And people would just go after the victim and they didn't know what coercive control was until someone sent me a real crime profile, Laura Richards podcast with Jim Clemente and why am I trying to blank? Eliza? Is it Liza? Yes, Liza. And then literally that kind of opened the doors to coercive control and it gave us kind of like, okay, this is the language and this is what happened to us, where everybody else was just being so mean. I mean, people were nice. A lot of more people were nice towards me because I was the victim. I didn't ask for this. I didn't date him in a sense. And he came after me with a knife and I got that knife. But there was also people calling me a killer. There was people saying that, oh, she did it. Like she planned it. And I, if I planned it, there would be a trial. If I plan like because if I planned it, there would be a trial to prove that I like planned it. You know what I mean? But I did not plan it. I literally was so lucky that I watched The Walking Dead and was an addict of The Walking Dead. And I think I'm also slightly neurodivergent, where I kind of fixate on certain things. And The Walking Dead was what I was fixated on during that time. And so it really, like, for me, my brain kind of computes things a little bit different. Like, I look at things kind of like sometimes more analytically. Like, okay, like she did that, so how I defended myself too was that the knife was directly next to me. I picked it up, I started wailing on him, and then the last two were to the eye, and those were like the softest point of entry to the brain. But my brain is saying those are the softest point of entry to the brain. My body is not like being like, oh, you need to hurt him. It's like, oh, how do I get him off and then kill him like a zombie because I'm used to watching The Walking Dead. Yes.
which is which is very interesting because I can imagine what that's like for you, like seeing that happen in like real life versus on TV. It's like, oh, we see this, we see that, or like playing zombies on like the Call of Duty, or oh, oh, I can't imagine what that would be like for you. And I admire the courage that you have to share your story in such an open way because it's so healing for other people to listen and to also feel like they're less alone with something that they're going through. And I always say that I'm an open book, but there's still times that I will begin sharing my own experiences and my own story. The police department didn't believe me. Friends didn't believe me. They just called me a slut and that you're this and you're that. And well, and then there was even like most extreme people like your mom should have aborted you, and like I've heard it all. I grew up with some like very like harsh people that I grew up with in middle school and high school, and it's like if only you knew what my mom went through. My mom's also a survivor herself. She's been through hell and back. And I think about that. And we're talking about ethical storytelling. There was a journalist, and if anybody, nobody can see this besides Tara, but I'm using parentheses whenever I say journalist because he did an interview on me and he asked me some like very like detailed questions. He was like, so tell me about the, kind of how like the producer was doing with like what you were saying.
Yeah.
He was like, well, I'm trying to write it in this way, trying to make it seem like the school really didn't help you, quote unquote. They did help a little bit, but it wasn't a whole lot. Full disclosure, I can roll my eyes, my mom can roll her eyes. There was only two specific people that did help me, and that was the at-risk coordinator and my counselor that I had at the school. Other than that, the rest of them were complicit. But he spinned it in such a negative way. The person who did the media for the district, like the media like coordinator or whatever the hell she is, she used to be a former reporter with a local news station. So she knows stories, she knows how to like scope things out. She comes, literally pulls me out of my class and she was like, "What the fuck is this?" And I was like, calm the fuck down. First of all, who the hell are you? I mean, I in my mind, I already know who she is because I saw her on TV. She was a
Yeah.
very prominent reporter in the community. But she was like, "Well, you said this and you said that." And I was like, first of all, he sent me an email. Here's the questions he asked me. Here's my responses. Calm your ass down. I'm a senior in high school, or I think I was like a junior, getting ready to go into my senior year at that time. And he just spun my words entirely and made it seem like everybody was against me and I was against them. And, we were butting heads. And it was like this whole like dramatic story that actually did not happen that way. So whenever we think about the ethical storytelling and we think about ways of telling survivor stories, because keep in mind, I was sexually assaulted at 17. I'm eight, or I'm it was like earlier that year, like, or the year before. But it's like, it's brand new to me. That's the first time that I share my story publicly. And I was like, I went home and I was crying and I told my mom, I was like, I'm never fucking sharing my story again. I'm gonna go hide in my fucking room for the rest of my life. I'm not saying anything else. I'm not doing anything else. It sent me down this dark spiral of going through drug addiction and then being re-victimized and trying to tell it to police. And it's like this whole fucking downward spiral that I just continued to go down. So ethical storytelling in a survivor sense, why is it important for journalists, reporters, organizations, anybody who's reporting or working with survivors? Why, in your perspective and in your opinion, why is it important for these journalists to recognize the need for this trauma informed reporting?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important because the trauma informed, like, you need to be careful not to re traumatize or re victimize the survivors again, because there could be ways that you say certain things, and then you can, like, even in the podcast, this isn't saying like anything about me, but just the word choices can even bother a victim. Like, I remember Christopher Goffard saying that I had a swimmer type body. And I'm like, I do not do water polo. And when people see me too, they're like, oh my gosh, Terry, you're so small. And I'm like, he could have said I was petite. But no, he like made it out to seem like I had this larger body where I could defend myself. And like I'm bigger than I was in a sense, rather than like kind of David and Goliath vibes. You know what I mean? But just even the word choices, but it's so important how you present to survivors, even like how you ask them certain questions. Because I remember being on this well, so many podcasts would be like, but why did your mom like date him? Why did your mom get together with him? And I basically saying, well, that is a victim shaming question. Or why didn't your mom leave? Why did your mom just go back? Because coercive control is so advanced. It is affecting your molecular structure and your body, like your genes and everything. Like, you want to give all to this person because your genes are also, even if you're older, your genes are still telling you, oh, we need to create babies and we need to reproduce and we need to build more babies on this planet in a sense. And that's what your body's telling you in a sense. So you're going and you're even fighting with that. And once they do all the 7 stages of trauma bonding, then you're completely locked into that addictive cycle. And so your body is actually telling you to stay in that relationship opposed to leave that relationship. So when you leave, you're actually fighting with your body's natural like kind of ability, your like natural instincts in a sense. And like those other instincts are maybe kicking in, that like you're turning into the prey now. I don't know.
And it continues to perpetuate, journalists are not, what's the best way to word that? Because journalists think that they are above like everything and there's no like ramification if they tell a story wrong. And
Well,
they
they
always see people like, I don't know the best way to explain that because it's like there's not really like accountability, and
they're
I think that
so
that's a lot of it.
So here's the thing. If you're a legit news source, you have to cite all your sources. You have to be credible in everything that you say, because that person could actually go and sue you for libel, which I have threatened a few news sources before. Um, and they went and they redacted and they changed things right off the bat because I was in this horrible situation where I was getting canceled. The podcast, I told someone to F off at a festival. Me and her are now friends. We're fine. Um, and she told me in a podcast one time, she was like, Terry, I should have F off in that moment. But not saying what I did in that moment was, right. I acted in my fight mode, when telling that person to F off. But I went and there was an article being printed about it. And I said, look, this, and this did not happen. Do you need me to get my lawyer involved? Or are you okay to redact that and do a new article? And they did a new article right away because they didn't want to get their legal team involved because that costs money. And I was so pissed enough where I was like, I don't want this out there because it was completely false. It was making me the abuser in this circumstance. And it was honestly a miscommunication. It was a misunderstanding, and we all needed to just talk it out and to get to the bottom of it. And that's what happened. And later, but it got blown so out of proportion by the news, by the media, by other people in true crime try to amplify it and claim victim in certain things or try to, even I've been accused of not being true in my story because of that one circumstance too. So this like one journalist was going after me, but is he like a legit journalist? No. Because journalists actually do have journalistic standards that they have to abide by. And so if they are not abiding by that, you can go after them for certain things. You can take back your control, but it just depends, like, also, are they like a gossip website, because if it's a gossip website too and you're a public figure, then they can also say, well, we're just talking about, gossip and it doesn't exactly mean anything. And because you're a public figure, we can talk about you. So there's kind of like some ways where you can fight journalists with that. It's it's like the podcast and that I have a lot of issues with. But like journalists do need to up their standards. Um, but the LA Times, like I will say this, like there is their journalistic standard in writing, and then there's journalistic standards in podcasting. And podcasting journalistic standards, there's no standards in those.
That's obvious because there's some podcasts that I'll be sitting listening to, and I'm like, well, should you really have said that? Like, if I
Oh
said
yeah.
that on like a meta platform, if I would have said half the things that come into my mind, and I always make the joke, like if I say exactly what I'm thinking on this podcast, I probably wouldn't have a podcast anymore. But at the same time, it's like if they allow people like Joe Rogan and Charlie Kirk and like all of these like big name like podcasters and they allow them to like spew so much fucking hate, I'm fine. I'm good. Because there's podcasts that they need to look into before they even come knocking on my door, figuring out why did I say this? Why did you interview this person? Why did you let them talk shit about this? And it's like, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Well, first of all, there's other ones that you need to go look at because they are spewing division. I'm spreading love and I'm sharing these stories of people who don't reach those headlines. And
Yeah.
oftentimes they are the subject of those podcasts that I was just talking about. And it's like, holy shit. You have an issue with me telling this person's story, and covering this story, covering this missing person case, covering this, covering that. Like, this is true crime, y'all.
Yeah.
Like, we live in a true crime world. The content creates itself. It really does.
Unfortunately, it does.
it just creates itself. And everybody asks me, where do you get your content from? Girl, it's the headlines. Like, it's the headlines. We live in
Yeah.
this horror show that I don't get me wrong. I'm big in like true crime, I'm big in like horror films. This is a little too real for me.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up at the circus. I don't want to live in a fucking circus. This is not the
Yeah.
Barnum and Bailey's circus. This is real life shit. And covering these stories has been a very rewarding journey, right? But at the same
Yeah.
time, and I want you to touch on this, the vicarious trauma of sharing those other stories. There are times that I will sit down and I will interview somebody that has like a very harrowing, deep, dark story, and I have more coming up. Luckily, this has been a gym. You are a gym, but that vicarious trauma of the storytelling is something that is highly, oftentimes overlooked. It's not talked about enough. I would love for you to touch on that vicarious trauma aspect and the burden that other survivors also carry by sharing those other survivor stories, because it's not covered literally at all.
Yeah. No, I think like our mutual friend Celine Beth, like she did interview some people that I am very close with. And then she got to kind of know their story more and also what they were up to now. And, I went through a year or a couple years, so I just like haven't been on point with like checking in with everyone. And when I heard everything that the survivor was going through, and Celine told me that they were going through, and I'm just like, wait, what? Because I was trying to get them money, I was trying to get them this, I was trying to get them that. But at one point, when you can't get people to listen, like it just kind of trails off in a sense, at least for this person's case. And then another story becomes popular, and then it's just unfortunate. But I was trying to do everything I could, and then I just went through a season where I needed to focus on myself. And it just broke my heart to hear everything else the survivor went through after a year, 2 years after the show came out about her story. And that person's making millions and millions of dollars. And this person is struggling on a daily basis to have a roof over their head. So that really bothers me because there is no, and quote unquote, like a small amount now because we're starting to try to make change, but there's not really aftercare. I know I talk to survivors on a daily basis who go through that with their own story, where it comes out in the media and then they don't have any involvement with it. Say, for instance, the Natalia Grace story, how there was a Hulu series that came out about that, and it was a very interesting done. I don't know the right word for it. It just, at first, it showed Christine Barnett's point of view. And then I went and I did a little bit of research and I was like, who's involved in this? It didn't say that Natalia was involved in her storytelling, which is a big red flag for me, especially when something's being put on stream by Hulu. And so that was a huge red flag to me. And then I went and did some research, and I guess Michael Barnett, the quote unquote dad who adopted Natalia, but was also a part of changing her age and everything, he actually sold his story rights for that story. So he made money off of the documentary. And then going back to like even the documentary, you find out that Christine Barnett made millions in dollars off of book deals and stuff. Not to do with Natalia Grace with that story later, but because of, dealing with a son not dealing with a son, but like having a son with autism, and also talking about how to navigate that world in a sense. But she was also kind of claiming to be kind of godly in a sense, where she's healing someone and claiming she can heal anyone. And, every case is very different in a sense. And first off, I don't know, let people be who they are in a sense. And so it was really interesting to see that story and how she had no involvement, and then to see other stories. And I'm kind of conflicted in this story right now, but the Murdoch, that one being across Hulu, because I think they are trying to center the victims in the story. However, there's a lot of that's a really messy case. And so I think that that's a little bit hard, but they are trying to center it. But it's also like, and I also love Mandy and I see her heart in a sense, but Mandy Matley, like being a reporter and then sharing this, and it's like, what is true, what is like correct in a sense. Um, and also like, is the victim's family involved in that? That's my question. And is it just like about the reporter's point of view? So I kind of question that about even that case going on right now. I see that they're trying to center the victims, but are the actual victims' families involved? And I would just love to see more involvement with the families, but I also get when the families are saying, I don't want anything to do with this story anymore because I can't keep living through this trauma.
Whenever hearing you talk directly about that reminds me of that Jeffrey Dahmer series that came out, where they did not consult a lot of the families of those who were murdered by Jeffrey Dahmer. And this is by a seasoned producer that absolutely should 100% know better. Ryan Murphy, looking directly at you, my guy, because there are some very alarming things with that series alone. And then also creating a part two, or, like a second season or whatever, there was a lot of outrage around that, and rightfully so. I cannot sit, like I said, I absolutely love true crime. I live it, I breathe it. It's on the background whenever I'm recording, like a podcast episode. It's literally like me and my mom like literally watch it like for hours on end, right? However, and I've heard some like horrific stories. I've interviewed survivors that have very horrific stories. However, I cannot sit and I cannot listen to a Jeffrey Dahmer victim story. I cannot do it. I literally cannot pull myself to do it mentally, physically, emotionally. I literally cannot do it because of how horrific he treated his victims. I can listen to Ted Bundy. I can listen to BTK. I live in Kansas, so BTK is the serial killer that's known in Kansas. And I cannot sit and stomach a Jeffrey Dahmer story. I can't. And I think it's because, I'm a part of the LGBTQ plus community myself. And he targeted a lot of younger Black gay men and gay boys. That was a lot of his specific target. I cannot sit and listen to it. I think it's because I just feel so connected to that victim, and I just cannot stomach it. I just
Yeah.
cannot do it. I did not watch the series. I tried to watch, I think me and my mom sat down and we watched maybe like one episode, and she looked at me and she's like, I can't. She said, I can't fucking do this. It was like 5 minutes in, and she's like, I cannot do this. I cannot sit and watch this. I cannot listen to it. I can't do it because it is so horrific. And to highlight that,
Yeah.
it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was a series that I was very vocal about.
Yes.
I was not thrilled about it because I saw the family members speaking up, and I'm always one of those people like, I'm going to back you up.
Yes. Yes.
And I hope that I was like, I'm doing these videos right now on TikTok, and I've been trying to get in contact with the family because I don't want to like speak about something that's not mine in a sense, you know?
Mhm.
But because I actually did, I got in contact with someone from Vice, and then Vice actually connected me with Rita, and then I flew her out to California, and then Collier, no, I got her hotel, and then Collier flew her out. Like he used his points and stuff. And then we just like brought her a part of like our true crime meetup and stuff because I do true crime meetups because I just like to just have people come together and have a family because that was also something that really helped me in my healing journey is fine. Like I thought I was the only true crime story out there at one point, which is hilarious because when your story happens and it's out there in the media and it's blown up, you sometimes just feel like the only person going through that. But then I started to meet other survivors like Lenora Claire, Kara Robinson Chamberlain. I met Kimberly Corbin, just so many other survivors out there. And I was like, wait, what? This stuff happens because I was told like you're so lucky to be here. You're alive. Like that doesn't happen. And then I literally meet Lake Collins and she like is a badass too and like was stabbed and stuff as well and fought off her like she had a lot more defensive wounds than I did. Like her finger was like cut off and hanging, but like she's alive and she's here. And I was like, wait, what? You can kick ass and be alive and there's other survivors out here? Like, what? Like, can we all just be friends? And then so I started doing these true crime meetups, and then that honestly really led into Survivor Squad. And meeting with all these other people and then having their voice. And I know it's not on Apple, I know it's not on Spotify, but I did link it to another podcast source. So you could still listen to those episodes if you go to like my link, it's on my link tree. But I made sure that those Survivor episodes are always going to be like out there at least so people can kind of like what you're doing in a sense too is even talking to these people and getting like what is the reality of true crime even, you know? And with Survivor Squad, we were kind of like the first people to like really do that in a sense, you know? But it's so amazing how like podcasts like yours, like Celine's and other people's podcasts are really trying to put that out there now.
Yeah, you set a tone. You set a trend, or not necessarily like a
Yeah.
trend, but you set that standard of like, look, this is how y'all do it. This is how it's supposed to be. This is how you do it. And it's fueled those other podcasts, because like I said, I admire you very deeply because you are somebody that I've looked up to for a very long time. And whenever we connected, I was like, oh shit, it's about to get real. Like this is like best friend material, right? But it's more than that because I feel I'm better because of listening and watching like your podcast and watching the content. And I feel that direct connection because I feel there have been times that I have felt lost. And it's like, what? I created this international movement, right? Here, like, did I ever imagine I would ever sit down and talk to you? No. Did I ever imagine I would meet somebody like Celine that's connected me to countless of people and like amplifies our work and vice versa, and she's doing like the Survivor series now. Like it's just so incredibly inspiring. Just sit down and talk to people you just don't just run into randomly at random times. I usually say another reference, but I'm tired of using it, so I'm going to say something different now. But I usually say meet at like a gas station or a grocery store. I'm tired of using that now. people have used that, or I've used it in other episodes, and I'm tired of using it now. I'm gonna find something else to say about that. But anyway, stay tuned on that. But again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for bringing your whole self and bringing the energy that we all need to see, because true crime is also not linear. It is the most complex, if not, it is the complex genre of podcasting, but also media, because of how much goes into it. And even within like the true crime space, it gets very disturbing and it gets very ugly. And there are still predators within the true crime realm. I'm not mentioning names. You know who I'm talking about. There's a couple. We will not mention names. We will not name drop. But there's a couple that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, and they know who they are. They know what they did. They know who they are. And
They know what they did.
they know. They know. We all know. But
Yes.
again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with anybody that may be listening? And then also, how can people find you on social media, and how can they continue to uplift your work?
Well, thank you so much for having me on today. And I also got to say, like, a lot of what I talked about earlier and the fuckery and everything, I feel like that's also fresh because I'm working on a book that will probably come out in a year. But you have to start somewhere. So I'm deep in that and going through those early stages of that healing process in my book. So I'm on like the earlier chapters. And, take your fuckery, learn from it, grow from it, I don't drink anymore. Like I had a drink at a wedding, but that's like a rarity for me. And I feel so much better in my nervous system with the things that I do. I have been able to, have hard conversations in relationships and just keep continuing on, even if today feels like one of the worst days. I promise you, tomorrow might get better. Might. You just got to try. And so, keep trying. I'm working on so many things. So stay tuned. I just filed for my nonprofit for my Terra Safe Haven. And so I'm hoping to get approved soon. And the first steps with that is I'm providing therapy services for survivors because that's really going to be the first step in helping women, men, or anyone leave is helping them realize that they're in that toxic relationship that they need to leave and planning for that leave. So that's going to be the first step is connecting survivors with therapists. And we're working on that, but we have to get approved. And then you can find me. I love to help survivors tell their stories, figure out how to do that in podcasting format or figure out, documentary or even get yourself writing your own book. But I really love to help survivors take back their narrative. And so I offer free 15-minute consults for every survivor because I want to help any survivor, especially if survivors don't have money or the resources. And then you can find me, Terra Newell, TerraNewell, anywhere. Just Twitter, Terra_Newell, but I'm not really on there that much. And then on YouTube, I'm Terra Newell Survivor, and I'm trying to get more content out there. And there's also videos on there that if you are a survivor, you need help in telling your story, there's like videos like that or dealing with the media so that I can have those always available to survivors. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's been an honor and it's been an all yeah. It has been an honor of a lifetime. See, it's been such an honor that I get tongue twisted. But Tara, thank you so much. I do greatly appreciate you. I do deeply admire you and the work that you do. I think it is beyond inspiring, and it does save lives, and it does help lives. It does help us realize that, I'm going to say it again, healing is not linear. I think that's probably my favorite tagline now. And I know I'm not the first to say that, but it's so incredibly true. And you embody this beautiful spirit, and I'm grateful to be connected to you. And this is one of many conversations, and I look forward to continuing to work alongside you, my friend. Again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I do appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you too.
All right, take it easy, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.